Greetings and salutations. As you can see, I am not my good friend Zack. My name is Sir Reginald Whitworth III. Now, normally, this would be where you would be hearing Zack's traditional introduction, something about greeting his friends and his imagined enemies. Paranoid sod. But, this tag is about the philosophy behind reading. And to have a philosophy behind reading, that would require one to think. And as Zack is a bit of a self-absorbed ass, he does not do much thinking outside of, things pertaining directly to him. And so, that is why he has asked me to do this book tag for him, and being that, despite his many failings, I do consider Zack a good personal friend, I have decided to oblige him. I feel compelled to remind you that this is the holiday season, and Zack does have a very compelling novel out, which I have reviewed here on his channel. The Garden of Lies by Zack Pieper is an epic fantasy worth your attention, and if you have a fantasy reader in your life, they would absolutely love it as a gift, I assure you. Thanks, man. I appreciate it. Thanks for being serious about that for a moment. You're quite welcome, Zack. Your talent with writing is only surpassed by how much of an insufferable ass you can be sometimes. Okay, now, on to the book tag. Let us get forthwith right on, shall we? So, what's most important? A good character, plot, or message? Well, to that I would say, what is most important to you in your day-to-day life, good sir? Do you care more about the direction your life is going, the people in it, or your mission? I would say the one-to-one translation is quite applicable in many cases. For me, my mission in life and what my goals are quite important. And so, when I look for a good story, I generally gravitate towards stories where there's a grand purpose, something that actually means something at stake. Absurd comedies, are worth a chuckle. I'm always willing to entertain surrealist storylines every now and then, but I always tend to gravitate towards high-stakes stories, really. However, it is very, very important to mention that no high-stakes story is good without a good protagonist. And so, the two really must be on equal footing. You need all the parts of the book to interlace with each other seamlessly to truly create a good work of fiction, you see. And so, I'm afraid that I cannot give a straightforward answer to the question, because if the characters and the plot are not on equal standing, and if the message is unclear, then the book suffers. I will say, as Mason in the Dark pointed out, that generally it is best to have your message taking a back seat. A good storyteller makes his point subtle, distinct, but subtle. Because sometimes subtlety is the best way to be persuasive. Should one read books about ideas or opinions they disagree with? Not only should you, you're a bloody damn fool if you don't. If you only ever interact with opinions that you agree with, you are a close-minded ignoramus, and no one of any mental weight has any respect for you. If you want the respect of anyone who has more than 2 brain cells to rub together, you're going to have to entertain the thoughts and opinions of the other side and endeavor to understand them. Sorry, kiddo, that's life. Question 3. As tech advances, what do you think will be the role of books? My good friends, I am here to tell you that I am a student of history, as you should be, and technology has evolved a great deal since we crawled out of the caves, and that is quite obvious. And there are some things that have persisted through that entire time. To this day, humans use spears. To this day, we use campfires. And I assure you, in 1,000 years, people will still be reading books. Whether they be on a screen or a paper book in your hand, that is up for debate. But I can only speak for myself in that I will always prefer a paper book. Easier on the eyes, and there's just something more intimate about it. More personal. So, I do not think physical books in your hand are going anywhere. But I am, of course, but one man. Question 4. How important are summaries, review, and art in your book choosing? Summaries, somewhat important. Reviews, almost ignored. Art, the only measure of whether or not art is an indicator of quality of the book, generally, is if the cover looks like a 5-year-old put it together in his spare time, you can generally assume the book is going to be trash. Of course, there are exceptions, hence the phrase, do not judge a book by its cover. But, generally speaking, the quality of the art indicates the general craftsmanship that went into the matter inside. So, as long as the art reaches a certain quality, I will entertain the story. Question 5. Should one ever skim or scan a book? Tell me, should one ever give a cursory sip to their coffee? Should one ever inspect their tires before they go on a long trip? Should one ever check their underwear to make sure it is free of holes before going on a romantic date? Sometimes these questions can be quite brain dead, and I am beginning to feel that this might be the reason Zach has unloaded this burden upon me. I will be sure to demand a drink as payment. Question 6. Should reading always be enjoyable? Tell me, is anything in life enjoyable 100% of the time? I can sit here and report to you honestly that I have had instances of coitus that were not enjoyable. Nothing is enjoyable 100% of the time. That is simply life. But sometimes we have to grin and bear it. Not in the instance of coitus. I would recommend you tell that individual to dismount you and take their clothes and be gone, as I should have. But if something isn't enjoyable, that does not necessarily mean you should not be doing it. For some, it is physical training. For some, it is going to work. For some, it is reading. Is it important to be well read? Is it important to wipe your ass after a shit? Is it important to eat? Is it important to sleep? I wonder. What is your book buying process?
Let me take this one. Okay, so First, I go down to my local hooker at 72nd and Pacific, right? And I ask her, hey, I would like to contract syphilis. And then what I do is I wait until it sufficiently rots my brain, and then I go on Reddit. And at such point that the syphilis has sufficiently rotted my brain and Reddit has sufficiently put enough garbage in my head to where I now care about other people's opinions, I go to the bookstore and ask for a suggestion.
Smart-ass answers aside, I actually picked this trick up from my good friend Zach and started using it henceforth and have noticed that it is actually quite effective. I grab a book that I'm looking at, read the description, and look at the art. If it passes that initial check, I turn to the last page and I read it, whether it be a sentence or a full page. And if the last page reads well, I buy the book. And to this day, that test has only failed me one time. So, that is my process. What is your question 9? What is your reading process? I thought you said you didn't want to do the tag.
Yeah, but if I don't answer this question, how will people ever know that I do all of my reading by ripping fat rails of cocaine, doing a mega dose of LSD via ocular administration, and then shoving the entire manuscript up my ass?
Yes, well, answer full of obscenities aside, I should like to think that most of the time I would get to sit down by my fire, a cup of halfway decent brandy, and perhaps a good scotch if the material calls for it. Or if I'm feeling celebratory for whatever reason, a fine sampling of mead. But whatever I'm choosing to drink, sitting by the fire, cold alcohol in my hand, and preferably a thunderstorm outside. That really sets the mood, I dare say. Yes. Question 10. How do you use what you read? In every possible way. The more you read, the more intellectual tools you have at your disposal. And the fun thing about tools is you can usually use them for many things outside their intended purpose. Screwdrivers are meant to drive screws or take them back out. But you can also use them as pry bars. You can use them to bridge electrical circuits in a pinch. You can use them to chisel. And in certain circumstances, they make quite excellent shanks. Don't ask me how I know that. I just do. Question 11. If you could download a book to your brain, would you still read? Well, as my esteemed colleague here on BookTube, Pay VO over at the channel Attention, put it, downloading a book to your brain is what reading is. However, I assume the person asking this question, what they meant was if you could simply hook, say, a USB drive to your brain. Just click it right in there, and the book was pop in your head. Would you still read? I would say yes. Yes. Because the fact of the matter is most of my reading is done for pleasure. The only books that I would just pop in would be things like instruction manuals, car manuals, dictionaries, things that, are not fun to read. So, question 12. What are your views on rereading a book? Well, that depends. Tell me, what are your views on practicing any given skill any more than one time? What are your views on learning an instrument? memorizing a play so that you can act it on stage, admiring a piece of art for the second or third or 100th time. Tell me, what are your views on that? What makes a book good? Question 13. What makes a book good? Well, considering that a book is an object and henceforth bereft of all morality, I would assume the insanity of the person who's saying it is good. Now, if I was to swap-a-roo the old order of the words there, as it were, and we were to say, what makes a good book? Well then, that is a worthy question. I dare say, a protagonist that has something more interesting about him than bulging muscles and a halfway decent command of banter. It takes a little bit more than that to make a good protagonist. A female interest who's more than a pair of tits. Don't get me wrong. As a gentleman of the Queen's Empire, I do love a good pair of mammaries, but a woman needs a bit more than that to be appealing. After that, I dare say you have to have a halfway decent command of the language. You know, my good friend Pavio likes to make fun of that gentleman who authored Fight Club, but I assume that if he read the work of Michael Ross, he would have a stroke. So I dare say command of the language is quite important. And after that, I think it's reasonable to demand at least a halfway decent storyline. And if somewhere in there the author can fit in a worthwhile message, that is also excellent. Excellent indeed. What makes a book bad? Go read Elphistra the Sorceress. It's all in there.
I still have nightmares.
Quite. Question 15. How do you feel about not finishing a book? Well, it depends, really. How good is it? If it's, a good book, I get quite upset when I'm not able to finish it in a timely manner. There have been nights that I stayed awake, knowing I was only going to get 2 or 3 hours of sleep because of my actions, but I stayed up to finish the book. And there have been books that I picked up, and much like the woman who I should have told to get off of me and retrieve her clothes, I could not finish. Question 16. Should the author's personal life matter at all? Does your peanut allergy matter when you're eating watermelon? Does the color of your neighbor's house affect your ability to get an erection? Tell me, sir, in what way does the author's personal life affect your ability to appreciate the art? Objectively speaking. Question 17. If you could only read one genre for the rest of time, what would it be? I assume the person who asked this question means for the rest of eternity, and not the rest of my living time. If that were to be the case, I suppose I would have to pick speculative fiction. Why? Because there's an argument to be made, you see, that all of fantasy, science fiction, and arguably even contemporary could be lumped into speculative fiction. Because the heart of speculative fiction is, of course, what if? And so any book where the premise is posed in what if format falls under speculative fiction. So I dare say that would be a good amount of material to sift through. Still, though, the prospect of being alive for eternity is... no thank you. Question 18. Do you ever read a book without knowing anything about it? Technically speaking, you interact with everything in the world for your initial time without truly knowing anything about it. You can hear what other people have to say. You can read a book on it. You can watch a TV special. But until you actually go do the thing, do you really know anything about it? First-hand experience is the most valuable knowledge there is. So, yes, everything I read without truly knowing anything about it. Question 19. What author, genre, series, or culture can you just not get into? Why? I've little to no interest in contemporary fiction. Likewise, I have absolutely no interest in reality TV and all things that run in that vein. I already live in this dreary and depressing state of affairs we call the real world. I do not care to be reminded of that when I'm seeking to escape into a good book. End of discussion. Question 20. Do you think everyone should read? Why? Well, even though this question is just a rephrasing, really, of questions 2 and 7, I'm going to entertain it anyways because I enjoy getting up on my soapbox from time to time. So, do you think everyone should read? Yes. Yes, I do. Why? Because reading is good for you. Assuming you're reading things that have any quality to them at all. Assuming you're reading anything that is intellectually more elevated than the back of a cereal box. Right? It's good for you. It's feeding your brain. It's expanding your consciousness. So even if you're reading trite nonsense, at least you're exercising the muscle you need to interact with the world properly. And hopefully, someday, you'll pick up something that isn't complete drivel, and on that day, your consciousness might really begin to expand. Do you think everyone should read? Why? Yes. Yes, everyone should read. Starting with very important books like the Bible, promptly followed by the works of great men such as Aristotle, Voltaire, Jung, Jordan Peterson, etc., etc. And if you enjoy reading for entertainment, well then, pick any one of the great authors. Tolkien, C.S. Lewis, Mary Shelley, right. Zack Pieper, if he suits your fancy. Pick up the damn book and read it. You just might learn something. I hate redundant questions. And so, there you have it. The Philosophy of Reading book tag. I believe it was Brandon's Bookshelf who started this tag, if memory serves, and it does about half of the time. So, if you are one who likes to give credit where credit is due, go over to his channel and check him out and see if he's worth your attention. I personally have not engaged with any of his content, so I cannot make an endorsement one way or the other. With all of that being said, it's been a pleasure being here yet again. please expect my review of Zach Pieper's second book, The Garden of Hope. It will be on the channel soon. And Zach is reviewing this important work of literature, Sun Tzu's The Art of War. Both Zach and I have read this book, and let me tell you, this is another one that everyone should read if they have any interest in understanding the nature of conflict and how humans engage with it. And that will also be up on Zach's channel very soon. So without further ado, have a good night, or day, or morning, wherever you are when you're watching this. Cheers.